Our disability is our greatest strength. It gives us the supervision to see the issues facing humanity from a more inclusive perspective and the grit to fight back against all odds. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the More Than Walking Video podcast discussion. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the podcast where people of all abilities gather to discuss pressing issues that affect the disability community and their implications for the world at large. We're your host. I'm Corey Pheez, C4 complete quadriplegic since 2005.
And I'm Jonathan Sigworth, C7 complete quadriplegic since 2006, both of us hailing from the great state of Connecticut.
We are recording this on Thursday, the 22nd of May, 2025, and in a little bit, we'll be doing our wrap-up episode of the month about due process, closing statements.
I'm going to be away next week, so we're recording this a week early, but you should be getting it soon. And just as a reminder, Super Adaptables is made possible in part by a grant from the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center. The information provided and opinions expressed in these podcasts do not necessarily reflect the views of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. For more information about the Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center, visit www.christopherreeve.org. Also, I should note that the views expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of More Than Walking either, but belong to us as individual speakers.
So high-profile cases consume media coverage. I mean, cases that have dated back, nearly 40 years ago with the Menendez brothers to even Diddy's case. So when you see all these things, it can be overwhelming. You're tried first in a court of public opinion before a court of law oftentimes. So millions of people are dialed into what's happening. Reporters may say something to this effect once the verdict is rendered. After a month-long trial, eyewitness testimony, combing through the evidence with experts and jury deliberations, the jury foreman reads the verdict and they could not come to a consensus and are deadlocked. Are you surprised? Situations like these happen constantly in courtrooms across America and the world.
That's right, Corey. And as we've previously discussed, anyone who has had to go through the legal system at any level wants the most favorable outcome. Even if the results of your case were to end like the previous example, you were allowed the opportunity to present it, and that right is preserved according to the 5th and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, which don't specify race, gender, sexual orientation, or citizenship. Due process is fundamental to keeping the U.S. democracy together, no matter what.
However, with every system designed to shore up a democracy, it comes with its fair share of snafus. It's par for the course. But when issues arise, it's up to citizens and lawmakers to raise those concerns, have open discourse, and make the necessary changes to improve the various rights that people really should have. This can only be achieved by thoroughly and carefully examining the problems without fear of retribution.
And fear of retribution is a concern that many have when they decide to take a stance that may challenge the boundaries of the current system. For example, recently we've seen individuals arrested for peacefully protesting or writing student newspaper articles advocating for peace. The threat of being detained, even deported, is nerve-wracking. However, there is a reason that people take part in these types of actions, whether it's fighting against an oppressive regime or protesting at your local capital for the timeliness of wheelchair repairs, like Corey and me. Making your voice heard is a way to bring awareness, and mass arrest or intimidation should never stand.
Ironically enough, we had talked about the Department of Education beforehand, and we mentioned about Jimmy Carter, and he seems to be a president that is constantly revolving in our discussions, right? So while I was doing some more research with regard to the subject, I came across this quote that he said, and I thought it was spot on with what we're talking about as far as due process and protesting and things of that nature. Jimmy Carter once said, "I would be opposed to mass arrest, and I would be opposed to preventive detention. But I think that the abuses in the past have in many cases exacerbated the disharmonies that brought about demonstrations. And I think that arrest of large numbers of people without warrants is contrary to our best systems of justice." And as we discussed last week with our jurors, it's clear that those of us with disabilities are concerned about measures that could be taken to silence any critic of proposed pieces of legislation that come up during legislative sessions, such as what we saw take place in the nation's capital.
Those are very powerful words, Corey. And I think the heart of President Carter's quote is the abuses in the past have, in many cases, exacerbated or made worse the harmonies that brought about demonstrations, the disharmonies, sorry, that brought about demonstrations. I stated previously during our group discussion that the atrocities of the past are one portion that we can focus on to see where we are. In the future, however, with each passing news cycle or event that occurs, you don't have to look 100 years back to see when the injustice happened. Rather, it's unfolding in front of our eyes. Whether it's the detention and deportation of migrants through rapid immigration and enforcement policies, or arresting students for protesting peacefully, the notion is antithetical to our Constitution. And I mean, just to kind of illustrate that a little bit, like if we say, oh, well, there's not mass arrests going on where people are being uh, arrested without warrants, it's just deportations. These are illegal immigrants.
Mm.
How do we know they're illegal immigrants if they're never being given a chance to sit in a court and see a judge? And the excuse that we are hearing say from the highest levels is there's just not enough time. We don't have time to give these people due process. And they could go through, the government currently has the ability to go through the process and give people their day in court and have evidence be heard. But they're rushing it. And when they rush it and deny these things, innocent people have and are and will get caught up in that process. And that is really, really, really dangerous. And even let's say no innocent people were caught in that process, it would still be wrong. Because look, is being an illegal immigrant the worst crime in the world? Right? Does that mean that you never have rights? If you commit a crime, does that mean you no longer have any rights as a human being? How we treat our criminals reflects on how we value life in general and how we value each other and whether or not we think that anyone is redeemable. And it goes against everything we stand for if we justify stripping away the most basic American principles of due process and of equal justice because of an accusation that someone did something. So what? It should not matter. Where is Batman?
Yeah.
Are we all becoming jokers? Where we're like, hey, blow up the thing. They're all just criminals, and Batman's like, no, I have to take you in the American way. Like, where's Batman?
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned Batman because it's like I think at one point, it was like the next Robin, and I think it was like the Red Hood or whatever like that, or something to that effect. But his form of justice was like, nah, man, you gotta like kill these cats, take them out, and whatnot. You notice is like Batman never like quote unquote kills. He always is like, I'm gonna go. Granted, like maybe he should institutionalize him in Arkham Asylum, but his goal is to always like, no, we gotta be better. We can't be like the other people that you're putting away, meaning that we have to have some kind of like decorum. It's just like, yes, if you commit a crime, there are consequences that follow it. But at least we can understand why the crime was committed so that we can better understand how to prevent things in the future. And it makes me think about like, before there was ever some type of process to ensure that people were treated fairly in the legal system, people were just, hey, yeah, I could care less. Like he did it and put him away, or she did it, put her away, and you have no type of defense. And it was great, when we spoke with lawyers, which we'll talk about a little bit later, because they're in the business of being those gatekeepers that a lot of people are like, man, listen, I don't care about lawyers. All they want to do is get money. And that's not necessarily the case. They go to school, they're studying the law, and they represent people, whether you're on the defense or the prosecution. Doesn't matter. They're there to try to help give whomever they're representing the best fighting chance that they can have. But again, with that being said, we don't want to um, miss out that the goal of due process is about protecting individuals from arbitrary government action and ensuring families and making sure
Fairness.
fairness in both civil and criminal matters are really given to them. We are a country of law and order, but what's alarming is how some legislators understand it while others don't. For example, the president and this current administration, they recently signed an executive order to lower prescription drug prices. I think that's all well and good to level the playing field so Americans pay the same amount for medicine that the rest of the world pays. However, it seems a bit hypocritical to cut funding in Medicaid, which millions rely on to pay for their medication. You need to have the ability to pay for the item, even if the price is lowered.
Uh, the irony of cutting healthcare and then lowering the price that you no longer have the insurance to pay for the healthcare is just insane. Anyway, which so all this circles back to why peaceful protest is really about demonstrating to those who work in government or control government where we're coming from. We already feel invisible um, in terms of speaking about people with disabilities, and perhaps all of us now feel a little invisible and powerless.
It's like some people get it, right? And others don't. Some things are just backwards. And so as we're looking at due process, some people are just like, lock them up, throw away the key, put them under the jail. But going back to my previous statement, imagine how all the people who felt when their case was pushed through because they didn't have enough time or because there was, you know, not enough evidence. Like, how many times have we seen people exonerated because of the things that have come into play, like forensic science, and they're able to show forth and present to the court like this occurred and this person evidence isn't linked to it, and then people get freed. That's because they're actually taking the time to review and making sure that we have a full understanding that everybody that commits a crime is not always malicious with the intent. Um, and you got to give people that fair shot at being able to explain themselves. Without it, I don't know what direction we're really heading to. And I think a lot of people feel that same sentiment. That's, kind of like when we discussed about, are we headed towards like a constitutional crisis with our legal experts?
Hmm. I mean, you'd think a multiply convicted felon would have some sympathy for others who are rounded up in the criminal justice system.
Mm.
Speaking of the current president, I think what this really boils down to is, here in the U.S. we've lost progressively. I mean, maybe a few steps forward, one step back. Uh, a sense of American justice, what that means, like where is Batman? How do we treat why is rule of law that that feels like a powerful statement where police are going out and cutting down on crime and you know but it also means that every criminal has the chance to see a fair court, right? A jury of their peers. And for any government to be able to claim that someone is a terrorist, to claim that someone is a supporter of terrorism, to claim that there is an invasion when there is not, to claim that there is a genocide when there is not, to claim that someone is a is a gang member and deporting them to a foreign country for the rest of their life when they've provided no evidence, that is so antithetical to everything that this country stands for and that any democracy stands for. And I just hope people understand that even if those accusations are true and these people are the worst of the worst, that is not how justice works. That's not how we do things. We don't throw people in prison and throw away the key. We've done that for too long and for too many people, and we've seen the how that doesn't work. And so why are we trying to do that again?
Right.
Um,
I think we kind of
yeah.
miss out on when we do that, we kind of sully the story of redemption. You know, you can kind of it's almost like a metaphor for like, all right, well, now that you have a disability, you no longer can contribute to society. Well,
Thank you.
now now that you have a felony, you have a criminal record, you no longer can contribute to somebody else's legal process who may not have the same crime as you, but they're trying to navigate the court system and be able to get out and do better and return to their families. You know, it's not about putting away the worst of the worst. It's really about trying to explain to others that there are some people who have done some heinous acts and crimes and they've had second chances. Um, and who are we to not give them a second chance when we're afforded second chances every single day and we may commit and do some things that we never get caught for. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard people when the Fire Stick came out, oh yeah, like I jailbreak that so I can be able to watch whatever movies I want, or I'm using this to get a better advantage, or somebody stole this, and because you don't get caught, you think your crime is lesser than the person who does. And I think when we see a good court, it's just reflective of the justice that we really want at the end of the day. And just going back to like the constitutional crisis and, even what we've talked about, um, when you watch like a democracy in whatever country, the eroding of it, it comes kind of subtly. I don't know if you saw in news recently how President Trump has stopped, um, this oversight of police departments throughout the country, in places where a lot of civil rights violations have happened. And as we're coming up on
Yep.
the anniversary of the death of George Floyd, you have, some right-wing activists who are really pushing for, Derek
A pardon.
Chauvin's pardon, right? Um, that's one of them cases where, um, okay, if Mr. Floyd was on whatever drug and had whatever fake $20 bill, it doesn't give a police officer who's supposed to have a lot of restraint the choice to be able to take one's life in aggressive manner when they're trying to apprehend somebody. He got the opportunity to have his day in court. He went through his trial, and now he has the consequences for it. He can be redeemed, but maybe not back into society. Maybe his redemption period is still with the consequences that he has um, behind bars. That's impartial. That is what makes the justice system fair. Even
And
though
that
even though we blatantly saw what he did on camera, you still had to go through it, right?
and and that process also disproved the theory that um, uh, George Floyd died of the overdose, right? I mean, so that's how you come to those things. It's not from conspiracy theories online. It's from experts. It's from concentrated testimony and study and really trying to get to the truth. And so, just to reiterate, like it's not when we're talking about the mass deportations and the lack of due process. I don't believe for a second that all of these people are guilty. I think the reflecting on how we treat, even if you are guilty, like that perspective, how you view criminals, ultimately, I think informs the humanity with which you look at your neighbor, especially the neighbor who you know nothing about, the neighbor who looks different, the neighbor who is in a difficult place, and is caught up in the system. Are you going to assume the worst of them? And if you do assume the worst of them, what rights do you believe they deserve? Because any nation of laws should not run on assumptions, right? You can assume the
Right.
worst of them. That's fine. I can assume the best of them. That's fine. A court of justice doesn't assume. It gets to the bottom of the truth and makes a just
Yes.
determination. And that's what we all need to agree on. And, so even if you assume the worst, what rights does that person deserve? Um, it's a question of the day. But Corey, what did you get from our discussion with our legal experts, um, Kathy, Jamal, and Sheldon earlier today?
Oh yeah, I definitely think that the route to solving issues is not by killing all the lawyers, as we learned through that Shakespearean play.
I
No,
thought they gave a pretty good defense for their existence.
I really do because I mean, at the end of the day, we have three legal experts with all different legal disciplines, right? And that tells me that there's a large portion of the population that needs defense or or elaborating on the subject that they may find themselves being tried or going to court over. You need that. Like, if my civil rights are violated, I may not be able to go to um, a constitutional lawyer on it directly, right? I need like a defense attorney. When I think about Kathy dealing with people with mental health, that's a real thing. I think back to the case when the gentleman, I think it was his brother, had called the police, and I mean, it was cold. It's like February, upstate New York, which it gets really cold there. And the gentleman happened to be nude and he was going through a mental health crisis. And he said some words, and the officer seemed to, you know, worry about that. It was during, like, kind of height of COVID. And they put a bag on his face, but the gentleman was handcuffed and he was completely without clothes. And subsequently, he wound up dying. Where was his due process at? Multiple cops were there. Wasn't just one or two, it was three or four. Um, where this gentleman was going through something. A lawyer like Kathy, who can speak directly to mental health, is what you need. So I found that to be very, very interesting. I'm just like, man, like, you kind of got to know the right type of legal counsel to have. And in Connecticut, I mean, during the day, that's all you see, from the Marquis Salomon and Morelli commercials to Ronnie Deutsch to John Heyman, Trantolo and Trantolo. And
Not sponsors of this podcast, though.
no, no, not at all. We're
Okay.
just, but I-91 corridor is like littered with plenty of billboards on why you need some type of legal counsel and where to get it from. So I took that into account. I say this one thing. So I think about the individuals who can't speak English well. And it doesn't matter if they're Hispanic or another country, and you're being accused of something and you're having trouble to communicate that to an officer who's arresting you. Maybe you don't know what you did was wrong. And how do you tell that officer effectively? I worry about that.
Although these days you're probably being arrested because you don't speak English well,
Mm,
and the officer is uh, an ICE agent who's checking off a list of how many people they have to arrest in a given month in order to meet their quota. Um, so not sure they did anything wrong.
right. And then the other thing too is, like, I hate the counter argument where it's like, I get it. Like, if you say, well, would you want your loved one getting killed or raped because this person, and then you bring up a case about that, and it's just like, no, I don't want that. But you know, if I say, well, my neighbor shouldn't own a dog because I was bit by a dog before, I can't really. That doesn't justify everybody, and I think that's part of the big problem. We kind of lump everyone into a category, and then everyone's fearful um, of the potential that this person can be a threat. But there are plenty of people. who are Americans and are very threatening. Um, so, we got to really be careful about how we assess folks.
Yeah, the vast majority of violent crimes committed in the US are committed by American citizens on American citizens. Um, and just to bring it back, why should the disabled community care um, about due process? I thought it was really interesting with their discussion. Sheldon, he handles due process, and like if someone was unfairly dropped from Medicaid, um, he goes to court and helps rectify
Mhm.
that type of situation. And even Kathy spoke about people being institutionalized,
Yeah.
without a due process given for them to defend their ability to stay in the community, etc. And I mean, there's just so many ways in which like due process makes sense. It's the only system that makes sense. And if we start giving that up and saying that one group of people doesn't deserve it for one reason or another, that is going to catch up to all of us whenever we find ourselves in a vulnerable situation, or we want something that those in power do not want us to have. And in the end of the day, it's liberty. Like you can be free. You can be completely free in a totalitarian government and never be thrown in prison. Go through your job, your day. Kids go to school. You go to the grocery store,
Yeah.
but you're never free because the moment that your interests no longer align with those in power,
Yes.
you're done. You're done. You only perceive to be free according to, chance circumstances, perhaps.
Yeah. Where your loyalties lie, right? That's
But
precisely what it
chance
is.
circumstances is no basis for freedom, for living without
Oh,
fear. So I'd rather not have that
oh
system.
yeah. And it's like, how many people would even recognize that that's what they're living under? Because I find that, again, and we
And
really want people to understand that we're like nonpartisan in our discussions, but I find that like when people cast their vote and they're like, yeah, because that person's on my side, and then they get into office or whatever, and they create a policy that affects you, then you're like, what's going on now? Like now your rights you find are kind of being stripped. And or the things that like we talked about, like you are aligned with that initially, then you find them things taken away, and all of a sudden you switch sides, right? And that can be problematic and troublesome for you down the line, especially in a authoritarian or totalitarian regime. That's the prospect of that is scary. I don't want to make those comparisons that we know of, but that's scary to think about.
yeah. I mean, another thought came to mind when I was talking about, even if you're not in prison now, like you're not living in a free society if that's your basis of freedom. It makes me think of, in terms of disability, like if you have autism, if you have a spinal cord injury, if you have, you know, if you're blind, if you're deaf, any kind of, mental illness, whatever, these conditions themselves are not what causes this are not what cause disability. Disability is a combination, right, of like your abilities, your individual characteristics, as well as the environment in which you live. And in a universe with free healthcare, like free wheelchairs, free all the access that I need, ramps everywhere, like
Yeah.
I am no longer a disabled person, you know?
Yeah.
The environment informs the degree to which I experience disability in my everyday life. And so if I look at that idea of disability and then look at, the erosion of these rights, the possible suspension of habeas corpus, um, where you could just get arrested and thrown in prison without a warrant, or the lack of due process, where people are never see a court judge, never have a chance to defend themselves, or seek legal counsel. Another really reason why we have lawyers is because none of us can remember all of our rights, and lawyers can.
Yeah.
Really great resource to have. But like in that environment, we are all essentially disabling ourselves by accepting that we are giving up our personal independence. We are giving up our ability to function as free agents in our everyday. Um, and if it doesn't touch you yet, that still doesn't affect it. You're still living a limited life. Um, and that becomes very apparent when these things start to touch you, when if you go to a protest and you get arrested and you never know what happens after that. So just it's scary stuff, but that's why we wanted to focus on this month. um, this is the ultimate social safety net, is our ability to believe in equal rights for all of us, um, without question.
I definitely agree, man. It was a very insightful discussion. I think, I'm going to continue to just look at things, I would say it helps me even more to look at things completely objectively, um, and not to, you can't be, I guess, emotional about when you are assessing what individuals are being, put on Front Street, as it were, about each case is different. And I tend to say that to everyone, like even down to my own kids. Like they could say something and I go, oh, I'm not too sure. I wasn't there to be able to know what was in that
Don't make
person's mind.
assumptions.
Yeah, don't make assumptions,
Don't
but
make assumptions.
yeah, but what I advise you to do is, maybe you need to just think about it a little bit more. Let yourself calm down and relax. And then oftentimes, kids come back and go, hmm, yeah, you were right about that. And I didn't look at it like that. I'm just like, yeah, and that's the impartiality and the fairness of someone who just does not judge you based off of their opinion, but they rather present the evidence, make an informed decision, and then can render their type of verdict in that moment. But yeah, man, this conversation helps to aid to the way my perspective will be going forward. But man,
Ditto, ditto.
dope, dope, dope discussion, man. So thank you
Absolutely.
all who have tuned in and will be tuning in and participating in our More Than Walking video podcast discussion.
Make sure to sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com to learn about the topic we will cover next and how you can participate. Also, like, comment, and subscribe to our More Than Walking YouTube channel to watch each podcast, and click that notification bell so you are alerted when new episodes drop. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for More Than Walking or Super Adaptables.
Until then, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else,
What, Corey?
keep adapting.
Keep adapting.